Boom! In episode 88 of Man Up, I answer the question of, do Asian values get in the way of being truly masculine?
Masculinity for the intelligent man. I'm David Tian, Ph.D., and this is Man Up!
Hey, this is David Tian, and this is Man Up, episode 88. It is coming down to sunset. I changed the settings so I don't appear so red like I did in episode 87 as the sun was coming down. Got a question here from Zach from the private Facebook group. He's been waiting a while. I've been waiting a while to answer it. It's a long question. I'm going to try to boil it down for you. Very cognizant of the past several episodes have been way past 5 minutes. I really want to keep it under 5 minutes, but I know that there's not any chance on this question. It's too big of a question. So he is a Singaporean, young, and he wants to do his own thing. He's an aspiring entrepreneur. But his parents, so he's done a lot of reading, and he's done a lot of growing. It's wonderful. He's still young. But hey, and anyway, this is what his parents want him to be, or this is what he feels society and his family and his, let's just keep it at society, want him to be. So he's got this little flow chart here. Be obedient and get good grades, then get the degree that they want, then get a high-paying and stable corporate job, then fly up the corporate ladder, then get married and have kids, then work until you are 60 and you die. Since when was life expectancy at 60? That's kind of sad. Okay, then he says, and in the process, don't stand out and don't take risks, and always please people, and always stay out of trouble, and embrace senior superiority. Okay, then he doesn't want to do this. He's gone through this intense journey, he says, on personal development and growth, because he didn't want to be that wimpy loser who's 35, unhappy, lost, who has spent half of his lifetime pleasing everyone else. Yeah, that sounds pretty bad. So then he's done a lot of growing and so on. So, great. And I'm skipping a lot. I mean, it's a long, the guys in the group, you know how long this question is. Then he moves into what he thinks is the issue. So he's had some massive growth over the last 2 years. Excellent for you. But he says, but I'm still feeling resentful and dissatisfied with the upbringing I had, which I believed has held me back to a large extent. In personal growth, we're always taught to live on the edge and out of the comfort zone, and we have to move towards the identity that we want for ourselves so that we can create the future we want. Sounds good. But the more I move out of the comfort zone or box, the more I embrace my personal values over the Confucius values that are imparted. My parents would attempt to put me, every time he does this, then his parents would attempt to put him back into that box again. He says, it's frustrating because it's undoing a lot of effort that I've invested to grow as a person. And a lot of it comes off as annoying and incessant naggings in order to maintain their positive image or pride. Okay. Interesting read. So my question is this: how can I learn true masculinity and escape the ramifications of parental imposition of Asian or Confucius values? Brackets, being a wimpy loser, always playing safe and pleasing people, not standing up for yourself, end brackets. After all, he says, I'm living with them and they'll attempt to control me if I step out of the expectations they impose on me. Thank you so much for hearing me out. P.S. For some of you who may not like what you're reading, I do understand that my parents impose those values for my interests, and I love them and respect them nonetheless. All right, great. So, two issues, right? So, well, one, actually, it's just one issue, because I thought originally, when I read it the first time, that he's asking something about getting out of that rat race, but he's clearly solved that problem. So it's not that. Well, at least he understands the problem. So that's not the issue. The issue is he feels like his parents are holding him back. It's mostly his parents. He doesn't really identify society and so on, but it's his parents. And of course his parents are part of society and so on, right? And of course the education system has something to do with it. But he identifies mostly his parents and the Asian/Confucius values. And then, I understand. I think what he's saying is also he doesn't want to sell out his Asian values, so to speak. So are Asian values holding you back from getting what you want? Here's a really, so I was a professor of Asian philosophy at the National University of Singapore. My Ph.D. was in, Tang Dynasty Chinese Confucian scholar elites, and on their the interaction between their intellectual and spiritual religious interests in Confucianism and Buddhism, because Buddhism was very strong and pretty much... Anyway, so I don't want to get into it. I was getting deep into it, about to. So that was, so I studied for most of my adult life, either studying or teaching or both the Asian values. So one thing you have to know is most of what you hear from people in Singapore about what are Confucian values or Asian values is the values of the masses. And it's the same whether it's Asia or Europe or wherever. It's basically what keeps the man down, right? So like you don't want your slaves or your peasants or your serfs or the farmers or, so if you think about how most of Asia was, for most of Asian history, there was a king who owned, who possessed 100% or 99% or whatever, 95% of the wealth, really, and had and all the power, and the wealth through the power. So usurious tax rates of 50 to 70 to 90%, and it's maybe not. You can make an argument that America is not that different, but like the point was like. But the disparity was much bigger, right? You actually had very little liberty and freedoms, right? So the elite. So let's make the distinction between elite values and we'll call them servant values. Let's use the word servant instead of serfs, as less feudal. So you have like or let's just call it the value of the masses. Okay, so the value of the masses. Now. Europe went through the French Revolution and then so on, and then of course the American Revolution, and have now democratized their societies, and the middle class is so much stronger than it was before. Okay, this is just obvious. And that came from within. That was a movement from within the population. For Asia, that came from outside, from without, from the external, and that was imposed mostly with gunboats to democratize or else. Well, it's not democratize is the wrong word, but like change your socioeconomic system or else you must. So basically, they wanted to do trade with the Asian countries in order to extract resources out of those countries. So this all should have been covered in your Asian history classes, which I know most of you in Singapore and most of the world has never taken, but everyone should. Learn about the history of basically the largest area of the... I'm so shocked that even in Canada, people still don't know that Indonesia is the 4th largest country in the world by population, 4th or 5th, and that Jakarta is the capital. It just still boggles my mind, especially with the dominance or like the prevalence of Muslims and Islam in the news. It's the biggest Islamic country in the world. So like this cultural parochialism just still, anyway, so get educated. Just, this show is for educated or intelligent people. So get that under control. Oh, cool. Now it's so bright you can see. This is like, oh wait, what is that shining thing? And I'm not even sure. Anyway, it's distracting. These are values of the masses. What he's identified as... where are they? Being a wimp. Don't stand out. Don't take risks. Always please people. Stay out of trouble. Embrace senior superiority. And then elsewhere further down, he says, being a wimpy loser. Always playing safe and pleasing people. Not standing up for yourself. Well, look. Those are great values for the conquered. Those are great values for the masses, who are peasants. Those are great peasant values, right? And for most of Asian history, 95% of the population, I would venture to say 98, 99%. You'd have to ask a historical sociologist or social historian to get the exact figures, but like well over 90% of the population were peasants of some kind or laborers, those, you want them to have those values. You do not want them revolting or rebelling or just like what happened in Europe. You don't want that to happen. You want them just dumb and obedient, right? So that's not Asian values, unless you identify Asia with peasants. Okay, and maybe you can make that equation, but you'd have to argue that because what is taught in the works of Confucius, the Analects and the Confucians, is not that at all. What is taught in Confucianism, by the way, he says Confucius values, and that usually means the values of this person named Confucius, and that would just be the analects, arguably. But Confucianism is not about that. It's about Confucianism was taught to, or it's arguable. I mean, it's debatable what Confucianism really is, but like the theories and lessons in the books of like the Confucian books, texts, were lessons to the rulers, the ruling classes, and oh, cool! You can see my bed now. That's kind of interesting. You can see the mess of my luggage. Were the peasants of the ruling? They were taught to the ruling class. Confucius started out as an itinerant wanderer, basically going from like noble family to noble family to try to get somebody to hire him to be a tutor to their kids, basically, or as an advisor to the kings. And further down my period of the Tang forward, the Confucian scholars were all officials. They were all government officials. So that's how they made their money. And then they theorized in the study room in their spare time, pretty much. And so that's, these are actually the values of the elite. They stand out. They govern. They lead. They are not wimpy losers. In fact, one of my heroes is Wang Yangming. Go Google him, Wang Yangming. And one of the most prominent, most famous Neo-Confucian philosophers. And he was a military general who put down very violent rebellions in the Ming Dynasty. He never played it safe and did not give a fuck about pleasing people. You can just read the things he says in his works. And he just tells it like it is. One of his doctrines is the unity of knowledge and action. And it's a really great one that I still adhere to. And in fact, one of my first academic article was on the unity of knowledge and action. And not standing up for yourself. Are you kidding me? These guys are so assertive. They're leaders. They follow through. They get shit done. They are leaders. They take responsibility. They stand out. They innovate. Those are the values of the elite everywhere around the world. In order to be elite, you have to do those things. You have to be those people. In order to be elite, you have to be a leader. Now, the bullshit that you've learned from society, especially in Singapore, and the government wants to keep you not rebelling. I mean, one of those things I was told at NUS is that the campus was designed in the old days, like the old parts of the campus, so that students could not gather basically they were afraid of communists back then. So communists were largely students then, student driven in that part of the world. So they didn't want them to gather and have big rallies and, overthrow the government and so on, right? Totally understandable, I get it. Oh, let's turn down, let them come in. I totally get it. So, that's there. And that's happening. They don't want you to revolt. They don't want you to stand out and do those things. But that's not Asian per se. And that's not Confucian, definitely not. So I just wanted to make this clear. You are not betraying your society or your values. Here's the deal. Every guy who says Confucius values, they've never read a fucking word of Confucius. I dare you to actually study Confucianism. And by the way, the world's experts in Chinese thought, with a few exceptions, the world's experts in Chinese thought for the past 50 to 70 years have been scholars in American or Western universities, English writing, primarily English speakers. And here's why. Because if you think about what was going on in communist China, for them to do Chinese philosophy, and ancient philosophy of Japan and Korea was largely in Chinese characters. So the Chinese, what was going on in mainland China with the Cultural Revolution and Great Leap Forward and just Mao, did not allow for academic freedom or for even just fucking studying, right? So they didn't allow those things. And the environment for academic freedom and extensive study and questioning and probing is still not open. I mean, you can Google Daniel Bell, who used to teach at Singapore as well. He's got some interesting things about his time at NUS. And ironically, it is in China, but he's got some really great works on Confucianism as a governing philosophy and ideology and so on. So that's all there. And China was not conducive to study of that. So instead, you have And I'll point out in most of Asia Pacific, there were world wars. Pacific wars going on pretty much throughout the period up until the 80s, and then finally the Japanese came in. So the Japanese, yes, come in, you can clean, please, thank you. So until recently, until Japan in the 80s, you did not have the environment that's conducive to academic freedom and academic studies. So what happened was, like at Harvard, the study of Asia flourished, places like that. So what I'm recommending to you, especially if you're watching this in English, now things are changing, obviously in Hong Kong especially, the standard is very high now, but it wasn't always the case. So understand that the best sources for learning about Confucianism right now that are not ideologically compromised, right? And I would venture to say even some parts of what you might consider democratic Asian nations are compromised in their academic freedom, are English sources. Now, I would recommend anything by a man named Philip J. Ivanhoe. So if you can pick up Confucian Moral Self-Cultivation, it's a tiny, tiny book based on his his lectures. I can't remember where they were, but they're very readable, really easy read, great little book, and it's a great primer on Confucianism. And then from there, I would take the edx.com course, edx.com, and look for a course taught by Edward Slingerland on Chinese thoughts, and he's at the University of British Columbia. And they are the clearest, most lucid explanations of Confucian thought, of Confucianism. And they are also great expounders. And Ed Slingerland was a student of Philip J. Ivanhoe. He did his dissertation under him, as did I. And both of them are great writers. And Ivanhoe especially is a very eloquent writer. So enjoy your study of Confucianism and find out that these values of like pleasing people and pleasing people in itself is not a bad thing, but pleasing people, what you mean is pleasing people at the expense of yourself, or the expense of your own personal values, as you pointed out. Always playing it safe, not standing up for yourself. I would say that there's this over-respect of authority, and that is not Confucian or Asian per se. That is the philosophy of the masses. It just happens to be that in Asia there are a lot of masses. Okay, so all of them, the middle class and the revolutions came about as a result of Western influence on Asia. There were very few, they were inspired by them. Things like the May 4th movement, but like those are all inspired by by the West. So because of that, it didn't go through the evolution to support that. It was just imposed, much like MTV in Hollywood was imposed upon Singapore society, such that the generation who is now in their 60s is completely like 3 or 4 intellectual or psychological generations away from the youth now in Singapore. So just to point that out, you're not betraying your culture. You have a misinterpretation of what Asian values and Confucian values actually are. And at the very least, what you think are Asian values are up for debate. Okay, so back when I was in grad school, there was a very vibrant debate about what Asian values were in the context of human rights. But human rights is a totally different issue from what you're talking about, right? You're basically, what you're describing as Asian values are the values of the losers. But not the values of the peasant. Like you want to just toil away and do your thing and not make any trouble, right? Those are the values of the peasants. The value of the elites, which you'll find in all the Confucian writings, because they are the writings by the elite. You'd only find writings by elite because, first of all, like 1,000 years ago, the only way you could write is if you were elite, right? The only way you would be literate is if you're the top 0.1%. And the only way your writings would still be extant now, they'd still exist now, is because you had the means to preserve them. And people found them important enough to preserve. Those are the elites. So, and then you got your parents. So this is a practical issue. And I think I'm gonna, I'm coming up to 20 minutes, but this is a practical issue. Let's see if the video cuts out at 20 minutes, but hopefully the battery will last enough. You say here, that you're living with your parents. And it's here, okay, cup and cup. You're saying here that, where did you say that you live with your parents? My eyes are getting, okay, anyway, you say you live with your parents somewhere in here. This thing is so long that I kind of lost my place in it. My parents would attempt me pulling back. All right, I can't find the exact place where you wrote that because there was an interesting turn of phrase you used there. But if you live with your parents, then tough fucking luck. Power to your parents. Your parents should be able to control you. You fucking are not independent. Look, here's the deal. If you're living under your parents' fucking roof, they have the right, I think, to call the shots. I think they have the right, no, something just went red there on the video. They have the right to call the shots. So, okay, we're back. Sorry, actually it wasn't the battery, it was the memory card. So anyway, so I was saying, if you're living under your parents' roof, you've got to, I mean, they get to call the shots. They're paying for it. And if you want to be a baby and go, no, I want to do it a different way, then too bad. I mean, like, then you get your own roof. And as long as you're not independent financially, I mean, like, then that's it. I mean, grow up. If you want to, like, that's like a 12-year-old saying, I want to do my own thing. Well, too bad. Your parents call the shots because you're living under their roof. And, you know, if you want to call the shots, live under your own roof. You got to get your own independence. As a 21-year-old, if you don't want to do what your parents want you to do, you know, then get your own fucking place and get some distance. You got to be your own man, you know, pay your own rent. And don't give me this bullshit about how Singapore's expensive. Yes, it's expensive, but it's as expensive as New York fucking City. You can eat in hawker centers every day, which is like $3 or $4 for a good meal. And the rest of and then the biggest expense is going to be rent, because the MRT is cheap as shit, right? It's going to be rent, and you can do what everyone else around the world does. Like in New York City, in London, in Hong Kong, you can rent a place with your friends. Watch the TV show Friends for a good example of how that's done. Watch the TV show Seinfeld for an example of how that's done. Though I think for Seinfeld, these guys were much older, so they had their own places. But yeah, let's go back to Friends, okay, Friends. So the TV show Friends, yeah. Get your own place. Just go to propertyguru.com.sg or some shit like that. I don't know, man. It's been a while since I looked up rentals, but I know the housing market is bad in Singapore, which means the rents are very favorable. So do that. And then spend a little bit more time commuting, which is great because then you can listen to more info products or whatever, you know, trainings while you're doing that. And yeah, and everything else you can save. It's total bullshit. People who have the excuse that it's money. It's not money. It's something else. So if you want to be independent, you think you're ready to go, you don't want to listen to your parents, you don't want to do what your parents say, then put your money where your mouth is and move the fuck out like everyone else in the world. Okay, it's time for you to grow up. And here's a message to all Singaporean men who still live with a mom and dad, but don't want to, or they're living with mom and dad and then wondering why their dating life sucks so bad. If a girl had a choice between going back to your parents' place at the end of a date or on a date versus going back to your own place, possibly with roommates who have other rooms, but you got your own room, what do you think she'd rather do? It's just awkward meeting the parents. So like, on the first date, that's just weird. And then you're gonna have to drag it out, and then there's not that first date romance. Look, here's the deal. Even if you don't want to take a girl home, you know, just psychologically, the independence that you get from being your own man, of making your own way in the world, of standing on your own 2 feet, are a necessary part of becoming a man. Cut that fucking umbilical cord. All right, I'm gonna end with that one. All right, so join the private Facebook group. Ask your questions. I really appreciate Zachary's question. I really do, even though it was so long. You know, it gave me a lot of stuff to think about. And in fact, as part of my online courses in Limitless and in the live events, Total Transformation, I have a whole separate course or module on Asian values and being a sexually attractive man. So I go through the history, I go through political philosophy, obviously Chinese philosophy, a lot of it, and show you through, like a professor, a lecture on how those two interact. So there's a lot more to be said, and I was very tempted to actually just give the class over the video, but that would be like another hour, an hour and a half, just the lecture of that. So I'm pretty sure it's an hour and a half. So I was like, should I do that, should I not? And I'm not gonna do that. In fact, I'm just gonna tell you what I told you now. This is already a fucking long video, and thank you very much for your patience in watching it. I appreciate that very much. The video is commensurately in length to Zach's original question. On that note, I will see you in the private Facebook group. Until next time, man up.